of course, one of our favourite people in the world is David Miliband. So what's he been up to?
Yeah, we had a bit of a treat last week, actually, over at Nesta. So two neoliberal princelings in conversation with each other. David Miliband speaking to the Nesta CEO, Ravi Gurumurthy. Nesta, as we know, who owned the behavioural insights team, the UK innovation lab for social good, I think is how they describe it. And David Miliband, obviously former UK Foreign Secretary, former head of the Downing Street Policy Unit under Tony Blair, former Minister for Schools, Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, a real big hitter of the left-wing establishment in this country. But now he's the president and CEO of the International Rescue Committee, which is a New York-based humanitarian non-governmental organisation formerly described by Martin Edwards on UK Column as a Trojan horse of the globalists. He's basically being paid nearly £500,000 a year by George Soros, amongst others, in order to basically wash Soros' reputation. Miliband described Soros as having tremendous commitment to the advancement of human rights, social justice and democracy around the world. Miliband has been gallivanting, so he's based in New York. He's been spending a lot of time in Davos. We talked about this recently. He's been seen at Gold's House, where they promote the Sustainable Development Goals. And he's also a non-exec director at Verian, the big global propaganda and behaviour change consultancy, amongst other things. And it was a fascinating conversation. You can go to the Nesta YouTube channel to watch the whole thing. I'm going to just pull out a few short clips because it just gave some amazing insight into the new Labour project in particular. And these two people were right at the heart of it. But more broadly, the inner workings of the British political machine, especially as it relates to climate change policy, which Miliband and Gurumurthy were intimately involved in developing, as we'll find out now.
You and I were in government in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in 2007, and the Prime Minister reshuffled in 2006, and the Prime Minister said, by the end of the summer, I want you to figure out how to get the environmental initiative away from the Tories. And he said that to me, not to you. You were a civil servant, so he wouldn't. I came and then said to you, out of government time, I said, look, I've got this commission from the Prime Minister as the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And we came up with the idea of the Climate Change Act, the Climate Change Committee, carbon budgets, and all the rest of it.
So the Climate Change Act, the Climate Change Committee, carbon budgets, all of that has basically come out of a conversation that these two had. It sounds like an inappropriate conversation as well, by the way, because Miliband, I'm sure you noticed there, did a very good job of backtracking about how appropriate it was for him as a minister to be asking a civil servant to advise him on political policy. Quite interesting. And the systemic impact of this has been absolutely huge, right? I mean, look at the way that climate is dominating the agenda everywhere. This is the biggest industrial transformation of recent history, and it seems like it's an inevitability, right? So Miliband went on to say that in the energy system, the changes won't get rolled back, right? This is a permanent change. Once you've electrified and decarbonised, you're in a whole different ball game on the back of a brief handed by Tony Blair, of all people, the war criminal, to a minister back in 2005, 2006, and we're now dealing with the consequences 18 years down the track. And how is all of this going to be facilitated? Through market manipulation and public-private partnerships, as Miliband goes on to describe.
Economic necessity, fiscal necessity means we've got to be obsessive about how well we spend, how well public money is spent. We've got to be obsessive about finding ways of generating investment that don't come off the balance sheet. So the whole, for example, the contract for difference thing, did you invent that in which department was it?
DEC.
In DEC. All sorts of instruments like that, quasi-public-private instruments are going to have to be necessary. But we've got to be obsessive about how well we spend and whether we're spending for activities that are going to generate. I also think this idea of the missions for the country mobilizing activity from outside government is really important on that.
So they're going to cook the books. again, basically. So the contracts for difference thing was market manipulation. It's about subsidizing low carbon energy providers. It's been running for a number of years now. And obviously, he talked about public-private partnerships, and those went great, didn't they, for Labour? Let's have a little look. Oh, no, they didn't. It was a fraud. We got about £300 billion worth of bills sent to us for £54 billion worth of services. So basically, we did this public-private partnership. We ended up paying 6 times over the odds. And rather than backtracking and saying this wasn't a good idea, David Miliband and Ravi Gurumurthy are actually going to double down and say we're going to do it again. Craziness, right? And actually, Nesta is still right in the thick of public policy relating to pretty much everything, in particular, the energy market. They just issued this today, in fact, I think it was, or certainly this week, basically setting out what they think the next government should do. And they need to be doing that because, as Gurumurthy goes on to point out, the left have got absolutely no ideas about anything at all.
Well, it's interesting what I think about when you talk about project is one, a really interesting diagnosis of how society was changing. So if I think back to Marxism today and how they defined the country and defined the limits of labourism, that was hugely interesting. Secondly, there was this sense that you have to think about the ideas and ideology that relate to those different constituencies and then align a policy prospectus with that diagnosis and with those and with that ideology. It was a thicker prospectus, and a lot of work had been done by people outside of government over many years. And it feels like we don't have that right now. In some ways, we may end up being in a situation where the next Labour government wins without as much ideology or as many ideas as perhaps were around before. I think the other interesting feature, though, is that the ideological debate is richer actually on the right of politics now than on the left. And perhaps that's possibly the winning prospectus for the Labour Party. They're not riven by these difficult ideological debates, whereas the Conservatives are.
So not having any ideas might be a sound electoral strategy, according to Ravi Gurumurthy. That was quite an amazing thing to hear. Anyway, as an aside, and I do recommend you go and watch the whole thing, it's really fascinating to listen to those two talking. As an aside, after last week's piece that I did on EY, Brian said to me, do you think that the big four firms like EY are working with Nesta, and are they working to get their ideas into the work that they're doing? And I said, I actually don't know. But then this popped up about 2 hours later, and Josie Kluwer, the EY partner who's leading the UK government business at EY and retraining 500,000 civil servants, was at the event. It looks by personal invitation of Ravi Gurumurthy, so we can say fairly convincingly that these ideas are absolutely going to be pushed through the consulting firms as well as through the political establishment.
Yeah, Ben.